Hey YouTube, here's again that continue from the last episode that we were talking about the Chinese history, right? So this episode we're gonna specifically talk about modern Chinese history, right? As you guys all know, modern Chinese history, it all started from the textbook speaking. It started from 1840. Why 1840? Because 1840 there's the Opium War. That was the last Chinese dynasty, the Qing dynasty, that fought a war against Brits. They actually fought two wars against the Brits and the French, and both were called the Opium War. I don't know why they call it Opium War, because there's a lot of opium shit going on that basically the Westerner abided by their free trade ethos of capitalism, because they want to trade. At the time they think that drug is not a big deal and drug is okay, just like any other kind of commodities that they think that it's okay to trade in China. Basically, for good and bad. They fought the Opium War in China, and China definitely lost. So 1840 they fought the Opium War, they lost. And then there's Hong Kong Concession, that Hong Kong was being taken away to the Brits up until 1997. So that was one part of the thing that opened up China, the so-called open up China. There are a lot of treaty ports, including like Shanghai, Ningbo, Tianjin, and you name it, all around the different part of China. I have a map and it's not gonna showing up here today. So basically, a modern history of China started in 1840, and China finally opened itself up to the West. And by 1911, guess what? The Qing dynasty collapsed. The Qing dynasty collapsed afterwards, and there's the Warlord Period. The so-called Warlord Period was not as chaotic as people think. Warlord Period is actually much more peaceful than the later on the nationalist, the Kuomintang, the KMT period, and communist period. It was actually much more peaceful and very liberal, very democratic. And even though there's some war going on between the warlords, but by and large they are very they get along with each other, and they exemplified by my favorite, five-color flag. It was during the five-color flag period, the so-called Warlord Period, that China actually modernized itself, and the greatest modern Chinese literature all came from that period. And it wasn't until 1928 that Zhang Xueliang, that motherfucker, didn't do no good, that guy finally gave in to the KMT, because the KMT launched a northern expedition starting from 1926. And guess what? In between that time, the communists established themselves through what? The Soviet Union Comintern, the Communist International, started to launch itself, try to export revolutions all over the world, and starting from China, because so China has got its communist China. By the 1920s, it itself start to mingle itself with the KMT, the nationalist China, but they keep fighting among themselves with the KMT and the communists. I'm not going to go into detail. They fight among themselves a lot. By the 1930s, the communists retreat through the so-called legendary, the epic so-called the Long March. They go up to the northwestern part of China, Yan'an, and basically they live in the caves, and just like the Taliban, grow a lot of opiums and set up their stronghold called the Liberation Area. But God knows what kind of liberation area is that kind. Like, at that time, guess what? By 1931, Japan invaded China, first of all taking over the Manchuria, and so we have the Manchu Go, and they set up their puppet, their puppet emperor, the Aishinjiro Puyi, who is the last emperor of China from the Qing dynasty. He's no good. He just basically setting up like a puppet emperor And by that time, we're gonna fight a war basically against the Japanese. By 1937, World War II is about at its beginning. They fight it all out for a long time. By 1939, Germany invaded Poland. The whole World War II began to blow out, and 1941, Japan blew Pearl Harbor. And we have the whole World War II going on. Basically, if it was not the Americans and Chinese are in some deep shit. Alright, so by 1945, World War II ended. America dropped 2 atomic bombs, which ever dropped in mankind's history, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 1945, the war ended. Japanese retreated and surrendered, and the war is over. And the commie still gonna fight the KMT. So from 1945 to 1949, the commie fight the KMT, the nationalists, for a long time, for 4 years, because the commie had the Soviets back up. So the Soviets basically take over Manchuria. The Soviets take over all the Japanese military weapons cache in Manchuria. They gave all these weapons to the commies, and what they do with it, that's what they do with the best. The Chinese fight the Chinese is the best way they could do. So from 45 to 49, they basically fight over the KMT all the way to the point that they retreated with Chiang Kai-shek. Retreated all the way back to Taiwan. So commie got the whole mainland China except the island of Taiwan, formerly known as Formosa. So they took over the whole mainland China with Hainan Island except Taiwan. So China got so-called liberated by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, with Mao Zedong as their head of the leader of the whole China, the head of whole China. So by October 1st, 1949, China was declared a nation, stood up by itself, and established a new People's Republic of China by 1949, October 1st. But subsequent little wars are still going on, and they're fighting off each other in the coastal area, but that's just a sideshow. And communists, as you know, they invaded Tibet and kick out Dalai Lama by the 50s, but that's a sideshow too, actually. But you know, between 49 to 79, basically it was the 30 years of reign of Red Terror by Mao Zedong. And I'm just going to touch base on the very basics that Mao launched. First of all, it's the 5 anti political movement to get rid of all these do-no-gooders, all of these bad guys, and basically they're the commie enemies and their own bad guys within the commie system themselves. And then later on there's the anti-rightist movement, so they get rid of a lot of rightist movement. Basically Mao is acting just like the Stalin. And by the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, there's the greatest thing that you've probably all heard. It's called the Great Leap Forward. 3-year hardcore political movement. Mao tried to industrialize China just like that, out of like that, from agrarian society, a bunch of dirt poor peasants, people that they're gonna just all of a sudden rise up, become industrial people, which is a fucking disaster for sure. It resulted in a huge disaster, caused into tens of millions starvations and famines, and a lot of people, tens of millions, perished through that period. And why? Because Mao, first of all, tried to get atomic bomb. Second of all, tried to get a lot of industrial aids from Soviets, and basically they were just don't really care about the peasants or the average Chinese people. So by the beginning the 60s, Mao is being sidelined because a lot of his cadres is things not going well. So there's a little bit of leeways, little things calm down in the beginning of the 60s, and then Mao felt that it was not right for him. And then there's a major thing going on. We all know about it. It was Cultural Revolution started in 1966, and that coincides with what? And you all know it. It coincides with the Vietnam. There's a lot of politics going on. I think I'm gonna have to have a separate clips talking about Vietnam. But basically, China was being a communist in the beginning, backing the Vietnamese, but things not going too well because China has some kind of fucking beef with the Soviets as well. So afterwards, China started to back off, and China started to backing Khmer Rouge from the Cambodians, and that was in the beginning of the 70s, and basically Mao was backing the Khmer Rouge from Cambodia, Soviets were backing the Vietnamese, and they had a little war going on. Cambodia was being invaded by the Soviets. No, not by the Soviets. Soviet backing Vietnamese, and China by 1979 had another war with Vietnamese just to punish them, and it was the time of the rise of Deng Xiaoping, and it was coincide with the same time that China started to open up, and Deng Xiaoping was trying to have this open policies, and coincide with perestroika and of the Soviets as well. That goes into the 80s, and China started to open up by that time, and starting from the 80s, China started to tone down with their commie issues, but nevertheless, they're still having this beef going on in 1989, famously known as the June 4th Tiananmen incident, which the commie killed a lot of people. But after that, everybody have amnesia. Forget about this whole thing. China started to become China today. Otherwise, China will become like North Korea as we know it, because in Mao's period, it was like North Korea. And so Deng had the better idea that China, in one hand, still going to uphold the one-party dictatorship ideology, the one-party dictatorship. On the other hand, economically opening up, and that's why we have China as we know it today. So this is pretty much a crash course of modern China history.